All right, and we're live. I'm here with Tim Tolka. Thanks for coming on the podcast. How's it going today, Tim?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to get started, can you just introduce yourself and speak a little bit about your path to becoming a writer?
Yeah. So I'm a writer, journalist, screenwriter, and I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was about 17, and I came to novel writing through journalism, but I studied literature first, and I was insecure about becoming a writer, so I did a lot of other jobs before I really put it all on the line and went full time. And that happened in the pandemic, which was a great time to take my writing full time because I was working for a lot of other people. So I've had a mix of like business intelligence work and research in addition to novel writing and screenwriting. And a lot of people will say that you should just go for broke as soon as you're out of college, and I don't necessarily agree, but that's how I went about it. I'm 44, and I can make a living with my writing. I'm happy to say, but it's not easy enough to do it like for like just, hey, let's, like throw caution to the wind. Like I'm still, like it's freelancing is a tough business.
And would you say like a lot of the experience you've had writing across different genres, different formats has brought you to the point where you were able to go professionally with it?
Yes and no. Because I feel like I listen to a lot of established screenwriters and screenwriting teachers. It's a little bit different than novel writing. I feel like screenwriting is a vibrant business, whereas novel writing is kind of a staid, like old-fashioned style business still a lot of times. I feel like novel writing, you have like a big investment and potentially big payoff. Screenwriting, you have a lot of different options at your fingertips. But both of them take a lot of preparation, like annoyingly. And the point I was coming to is that after doing well for a while, you can suddenly go through a hard period where you're not getting work. And that is really demoralizing for a lot of writers who feel like they've got to the point where they're a professional writer, and then they go through this dry spot, and I've heard screenwriters talk about this where they had already made it, they had done this big film, and then 3 years later, they couldn't find work. And that to me is a bit terrifying. And it takes away my faith in the industry a bit, both as a novelist and as a screenwriter.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that later, sort of some of the dangers of becoming an artist or becoming a writer, some of the insecurities and like the resilience you need to persist through it. But let's talk a little bit about your book, Blue Mafia, Police Brutality and Dissent Decrees in Ohio. I have it here, but I have it on Kindle, so I'm the one to hold it up. But to start, give me a synopsis of the book so people could understand what it's about, and then also if you could touch on how you first became interested in this story.
Okay. So Blue Mafia is a book about police reform, specifically a program called the Consent Decree. And it was a Justice Department program that was handled by the Civil Rights Division. It would go into a town, sending investigators from the Civil Rights Division. And when they had a lot of reports of police brutality or police misconduct, doesn't always have to be violence. It can be mishandling investigations or refusing to investigate rape cases, or strip searching motorists. All of those have been topics of consent decree investigations. But it's also about a civil rights lawyer's 20-year battle against two particular police departments in small towns in Ohio. And that is part of the fascinating thing for me, is that a small town where everybody knows each other, how does a group of officials who wants to change the way the police are doing their job, how do they get results? And what I learned from it is it's really hard. It's really hard to change the way your police department does business. And it can be sandbagged by recalcitrant officials in the police department or in City Hall. And all of your work can be erased by a presidential election. But not only that, as a civil rights lawyer, so back to the microeconomic aspect of it, a civil rights lawyer can lose their career for being successful.
Because they're making so many enemies along the way.
Yep, and the retaliation comes. So in a place like Ohio, being a civil rights lawyer is like being a bank robber. Like, you could go to jail.
And would you say a lot of times we think about like police reform in major cities, New York, Los Angeles, to a certain extent, it's even more difficult in a smaller town where everyone knows each other?
Totally.
What are some of the aspects that make it more difficult to change?
So a prosecutor who's chummy with the police, not only that, may be related to certain officers, for example. And this happens in Ohio because there's often nepotism. People hire their family members. And it's not always like they just get the job directly. They'll like help them get through the civil service test. You know, so it's like your family learning how to get into city government or into the police department. They help their family members, and then it becomes this like insidious group, you know, almost like a clan that controls it. And in Ohio, that tended to be like a ethnic group, either the Greeks or the Italians, and then they just kind of let their family run roughshod over people's rights. But yeah, chummy prosecutors, or just a lack of lawyers who will stand up, which is really frequent, the problem. Like, if you find a civil rights lawyer in Ohio, it's hard to get onto their roster because chances are they already have like a bunch of cases.
Because there's so few people
really
doing it.
Independent investigation.
Interesting. I mean, hence the title Blue Mafia, right? What got you interested in this story? How'd you discover this story?
I was trying to help a loved one reopen a rape case, a cold rape case. And I was doing some activism in Ohio, in a little town kind of far away from where the book was eventually set. But Steubenville, Ohio, there was a big rape case there, and we went to protest, and we met the civil rights lawyer who caused hell. You know, he raised hell in these two little towns, Steubenville and Warren, where they had just a legacy of brutal policing and chiefs that would refuse to investigate.
And one thing I've noticed about this book, it's incredibly well researched. How did you go about conducting the research for this book? Like, what were your main sources or your most important resources when you set out to write this?
I made friends with people in city council, with activists, you know, with church people. I made a lot of phone calls. I called everybody in city government and state government, and I did a lot of court research. So document requests, searching court dockets, and having people dig up their files, you know, like old public officials that retired. I'd go to them and see if they had paperwork from their time in office. and I read city council minutes. One time I was reading a city council meeting minutes, and I found a lady that just started talking about how she hosted DOJ investigators in her house to meet with local drug dealers who had been robbed by the cops. She was talking completely out of turn in the city council meeting. And I saw that and it just blew my hair back. I'd been searching for a person like this for years before I found that.
As you started to dig into this, were you met with any resistance from people?
Yeah. Lots of fear, like a little bit of threatening, like social media threats. People told me to stop what I was doing. Somebody tried to hack into my my Twitter account, and there was a retired police detective who was helping me, and somebody hacked his phone and sent a malicious text to all of the people in his address book.
Wow.
And it erased people's phones.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a sophisticated adversary.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And what was your process of actually writing the book like? So like what's when you're deep in this, what's a week in the life of Tim when you're writing this book?
A lot of rewriting, revising, changing the order. Like I had 5 different chapter 1 changed 5 or 6 times. And even in the end, I wasn't happy with it. So like really like an obsession with perfection, but also like leaving one story and picking up another, getting on the phone to try to track down more facts. It was really difficult. Working part-time, working on the book for 12 hours at a time sometimes. Talking on the phone and taking notes. It would be easier today with AI and like automatic transcription services. It would be way easier.
How long did the book take you in all?
About 6 years before I published it, but then I kept editing it for another 2 years, and I just republished it on Amazon every time that I found mistakes. And yeah, changing the forward, changing the copyright information. I republished it dozens of times.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about self-publishing and that journey. But one more question about this book. So in your intro, you said that writing the book led you to a new respect for American democracy, and that the fact you were able to write it is a testament to the strength of American democracy. What did you mean by that?
I meant that I was able to write and publish this book without the windows in my car getting busted out, which happened to a journalist that wrote basically the story that attracted me to the book, where I was sure that this was a true story. It wasn't just this guy babbling about something that was like half true. There was a journalist who really dug into it, and she wrote a 3,000 word series, and it won awards, and it got her windows busted out. But she was kind of local. I was far enough away to where the retaliation, like they would have had to work really hard to retaliate, across state lines. So I wouldn't. I was kind of bombastic in saying that it gave me faith in American democracy. Maybe I wouldn't go so far today, but I think it is remarkable to be able to publish a book like that and not face more blowback, lawsuits, false charges. But I have very carefully avoided Ohio for the years.
As you don't travel to Ohio.
No, not really.
Yeah.
So I haven't had really a chance to test that theory. But I think it is remarkable that DOJ was doing this program, very, very much against the will of police and especially police unions. But those investigators and those monitors and auditors also got threats and creepy phone calls and stuff. So it's not without like caveats. But I do think it is remarkable. There are a lot of countries where you could not do this. Like they would literally kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. We met in a country such as that, where the repercussions for journalists are often deadly.
Yeah. And neither one of us wrote about Mexican police.
No, I think I told you once I had someone, I think from Vice, asked me if I wanted to do an article about crypto and the Sinaloa cartel. No, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't touch it while I was there.
Yeah, that's scary. But all right, let's change gears a little bit. So you went ahead and you did you self-published this book. So that means you edited it yourself, you got the cover done, you presumably did some sort of marketing plan. What did you learn about the publishing process along the way?
Okay, so it was extremely, extremely hard. Publishing the book is easy. Promoting the book is harder. I had a dedicated audience, a small one, but a really an audience with great anticipation, so that when I published the book, over the next 24 hours, the sales on Amazon brought me to the top of my category, which is one of those things that you want to do, right? On Amazon, you want to get to the top of your category, at least the top 10. And that helps you get some Amazon cachet, I guess you'd say. But I didn't have the patience to go through the traditional process. I tried it, and I think it's a good idea for all writers to give it a shot. Give 6 months to send out 50 to 75 queries and see if you get traction. It's really tough to get traction these days, but if you get like 2 replies, that's traction.
And you mean by queries, like querying a literary agent or a small publishing house?
Yeah. A lot of them are vanity presses, which will charge you to publish your book. And I didn't try that. I couldn't say whether it works or not. I wouldn't doubt that there have been people who found success that way. What I did was I invested about $10,000 of my own money, some of it borrowed. I got a professional cover designer and I edited it mostly myself, which was extremely tough. That's why I had to edit for another 2 years after the first publication date. But I put up a very basic website. I had a Twitter account already going for 2 years. And I got a PR rep who had a list of emails to send out, pitches. And I got some radio and TV interviews. Those, every time you get a TV interview or a radio interview, you can expect some sales. And get more and more of those. Now you got podcasts. Really, a podcast is like a writer's dream. New podcasters are always looking for guests, and even like established podcasts, if you have a really interesting topic or a fresh take, it's great. It's a great ecosystem. I've continued to do interviews about this book, and it continues to sell the book.
And do you can you recall any mistakes or errors that you made maybe in the first year or so of publishing the book, things that you would do differently now?
So I had too many errors in the book to start with. I rushed the process, which was like kind of deserved. People in my life were like begging me to break up with the book. The book, you could argue, may have like sort of cost me the marriage that I was in. So I made a lot of sacrifices for the book, and people were just like, dude, please just put the book out. Like, fuck it. you know, like you've done enough. I don't think that I would redo the interviews or the way that I went about it. I think I did as well as I could. It was a uphill battle, and I did radio and TV interviews, like very limited number, but you know, I mean, a first-time writer is not going to be on MSNBC most likely, you know, unless you're like, you know, some celebrity's best friend, you know, and write a memoir suddenly, you know, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I definitely relate to this feeling of something you've been working on for a long time starting to be like a weight on your shoulder, or like you need a sense of urgency just to get it out. And in that process, maybe you should have edited a little more, or you should have done this a little different. But without that sense of urgency, you know, you can just keep carrying a project forever.
Well, I would say that having the book out motivated me to go back and edit better.
Yeah.
Because I'd be like flipping through it, open on a page and see an error and just be like, oh my God, you know, like I have to fix this now, you know?
Yeah, I understand. And I mean, one of the benefits of Amazon is that you can go back in and fix something. And that's nice. Speaking of editing, do you have editing process or any editing like theories or advice or a certain approach that you take to editing a work?
So just to get past the typos and the grammatical errors, I feel like the more deep editing, you need some time away from the book, you know, to read it and to be like, this is boring. A lot of first-time writers that I've edited for, they were still like really close to the work and could not see it with new eyes. And to do a good job in a deeper edit, like you need to be able to look at it and with a critical eye, like it's the first time you've looked at it, and just be like seeing through, you know, that it's not your work, it's just a work, and you're like, this doesn't grab me, you know. It's hard to make those edits that are going to bring it to the finish line. That's why I get hired a lot to edit for other people, is because they're done, they're exhausted, you know. And at the end of writing a book, I don't know how you get through that editing process. It took me so many years because I was strung out, you know. I was not able to. It was a long book. It was much longer than it should have been. I needed to eliminate like 3 or 4 chapters just to make it like within the realm of, you know, a normal book. I mean, my book's 120,000 words almost, which is on the longer side. You know, most nonfiction is between like 50 to 80,000. That's where the publishers like to see it. So, yeah, you need to get some distance to it where you can be like, okay, this chapter is inessential.
Yeah.
You know? And so if you're writing like scenes, for example, like scenes and conversations that go on too long, or they start too early and they leave the conversation ends too late. You know, that's the screenwriter's rule of thumb, is like enter late, leave early when you're doing dialogue. You know, like you don't need people to introduce themselves. You know, you don't need first-time writers will often have too much dialogue and not enough description of the character's expressions or reactions to things. And that's, as a nonfiction and fiction writer, it's really, really hard. If you're writing nonfiction, it's hard to get that detail. And if you're writing fiction, it just takes too long. You know, you're like, I want to be done with this, you know?
Yeah, interesting.
But I would say 5 years is really not that long. If somebody says, I've been working on this 5 years, like, okay, that's a long time, but it's not like too long, really.
No, not for writing a full nonfiction book, not by any means. Speaking of writing across different genres, so you write screenplays, nonfiction, articles. Are there any like writing rules that hold true across all of these genres? So that when you're writing a screenplay or you're writing a nonfiction scene, there's certain, axioms that you can apply to all forms of the writing you do.
Some really good rules or advice that I've heard is one, write about what you are afraid of now, what you are struggling with now. Like if you got a character and you need to give your character depth, think about what you're facing in your own life. Like what are your fears and hopes? And then those are going to be the things that are going to mean the most to you when you're developing this character. Like the finished work will have a profundity for you. And I think that is like more important. A lot of people will chase the market. They're like, oh, like this thing is in vogue and I'm going to write for that. But they don't understand that you can't time the market to where, your book is done when this thing is still popular. I started writing about police reform a little bit before it became like I was writing about this Blue Mafia before Black Lives Matter existed, and I was doing the sexual assault stuff before Me Too, and Blue Mafia was along both of those lines. It was investigating police brutality, but it was also investigating the effect of police misconduct on women's, women as victims, their cases. So don't try to write about something that's popular now. By the time you're done, it won't be popular anymore. Write about what is meaningful to you and what you're struggling with. And something that works across all genres is having a story diagram. So the hero's journey, Save the Cat, the 22 steps of what's his name? I can see his face, but I'm not going to remember his name. John Truby. He's a screenwriter. So novelists should know that screenwriting has a lot of helpful tools that will make your novel much better. I feel like there is a bit of novel writing for me has not been updated at the speed that screenwriting is. Like the film industry is constantly evolving, and the like pedagogy of noveling is not really like on that kind of an evolutionary trajectory. Like you don't get like a new tool to write a novel every 5 years that like takes the market by storm. But in screenwriting, that happens. Somebody comes out with a flashy new screenplay and it affects like the whole industry. But in novel writing, people are going back 100, 200 years, 1,000 years. They're going back to the Aristotle's Poetics, and everybody's like, oh, but Aristotle really had it figured out. And I'm like, maybe, but I don't know if that's the best guide for today's audience who, is like suffering from an attention deficit disorder. Like you can't write a 5-page opening for your novel and hope that the audience is going to be along for the ride. Like you need to get them in the first line.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I wonder, one aspect of it is that screenwriting, not just the screenwriting, but the movie making, right? There's all these new tools becoming available, like AI or just the advances of special effects. Whereas a novelist, your tools are pretty much the same as they always were, which is like a pencil and a notebook. Like that's what you essentially need, and it's gonna stay like that indeterminately. And then we also have, you mentioned sort of this ADD, short attention span promoted by social media and TikTok reels, and there might be more of a need to draw your reader in a way than back in the day when people were reading, 800-page novels and you got not much to do, not much else going on. That's interesting to think about. And but even within those two sort of different genres, there are certain, rules that stay steady when you write, and you kind of learn from screenwriting and bring things into noveling, and vice versa, maybe to an extent.
I do. I feel like learning from screenwriters helped me see where the fat could be taken off my novel, because screenwriters have a really essentialist craft. Like they have a page number count that they're looking for, that the industry is kind of demanding, and they have like a beat sheet, it's called, which is like a set of story points that are typical across stories. And that is super helpful for a novelist, because I feel like a lot of novelists go into a story that they have they have a few scenes mapped out. They have a general trajectory, what they want to have for their character. But screenwriters have like a set of common events that they refer to, and like plot devices, like really simple elemental things that often happen. Like you have an attack by an ally, right? Somebody betrays you. Or you have the dark night of the soul, which is both in novels and screenwriting, but in screenwriting it is down to a science. And as far as like crossing genres, I did a lot of police procedurals and detective stories, and that craft or that genre has undergone a lot of evolution. But you still kind of like stay with the really general basic blueprint. Crime happens, the reader's conscience is shocked, and they demand justice. So then you take them through this, circuitous path to justice, but it has to be achieved. In sci-fi and fantasy, like there is some parallels, but yeah, like you can definitely take the truths of one genre and transplant them. The Western is super closely related to the detective story, which I love,
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think, if any novelists are listening, do you have any recommendations of good books about screenwriting?
I don't know if I've ever actually finished one. Like I'm not a very good reader. I used to read a lot, and now maybe it's social media, but I just do not have the attention span to finish a book.
Interesting.
So there are like some really great screenwriting books out there, but I don't think I've read more than a few pages. I mostly listen to podcasts.
There you go.
Film Courage is fantastic, or anything by John Truby. There are 1,000 interviews with John Truby, and he's fantastic. Save the Cat is a fantastic book, but there's also Save the Cat for novelists. So Save the Cat is a system that was devised by Blake Snyder, who's now RIP, but it's about the essentials of every story in Hollywood, and it's really great for novelists. I think the danger of these beat sheets and like plot diagrams is that they constrain the writer, and they take away a little bit of that creativity. But I also think that you're more likely to be helped by a screenwriting diagram against the danger of getting lost in the second act. You know, the middle of your book is always a perilous time. You know, it's really hard to keep the plot going. I think that's probably the biggest problem I've seen across all novels that I've ever been asked to edit.
Interesting. That's very good. Good advice. I just have a few more questions for you. What is how do you cultivate and maintain your discipline as a writer? And also, is there any sort of physical discipline that's required or that you practice?
It is really, really hard to maintain discipline. I have 6 books that are mostly finished, and I have only published one of them. So I think that speaks to my lack of discipline. But the writers who have done really, really well, one of the ones that I constantly think of is Shonda Rhimes. She wrote Scandal and Grey's Anatomy. She's a creator now, like she does both the management and the writing. And I'm not totally sure that this is a true story, but I heard that her big break came after finishing a pilot that she worked on during like her after work time. Like she got done working her full day, and I don't know if she had kids or something like this, but at the end of her day, she wrote. And personally, I find that as such an inspiring but also like intimidating story, because writing at the end of the day is so hard. I think you're probably better off waking up early. I've not been able to do that. It's extremely hard. But I do use a timekeeping device. I use Toggle, and I track all of my time. Like I track the time that I'm sending emails, I track the time that I'm actually writing, the time that I'm researching, all the time that I was a freelancer, so I needed to be able to show what I was doing with my time against like the words produced or edited. And so it was part of my job, but I also think it's just a really good discipline to know how much time you've actually spent. I mean, did you just sit in front of your computer and waste time? You know, like, did you actually write for 30 minutes? Or did you sit there for 20 minutes and write for 10?
Yeah, and now that we all are on computers and we're not on, a typewriter or in our notebook, you could be on the computer with your Microsoft Word document open and searching Google and checking the news. And
Exactly.
is Toggle a tool that helps with that? Like, do you ever black out the internet when you're writing?
I don't, but I should. As a novelist who does a lot of research and a journalist who writes long form, I need the internet a lot. Like I will go on Google Maps Street View to walk down the street, wherever I am. Like if I'm writing about, Italy, I'm like walking the streets, or like watching an Italian movie, whatever it is, I'm deep in the research. There's another thing I was going to say. Stephen King, he writes 6 pages a day. I mean, he's one of the most prolific writers ever, alongside Bill Shakespeare. But he wrote 6 pages a day, and I think that's doable. That's about 1,000 words, 12,000 words, or 1,200 words. I think it's totally doable. Some people can do it in a few hours. Sometimes it's a vomit draft. There's a difference between writing and rewriting. Some people like to finish their whole book before they go back and edit. I don't do that. I write, and then I edit, and I write, and I edit, and I revise. I get bogged down. I will say that your first book is more likely to take you a long time, whereas your second book will take you like 1/5 of that time, because you will have like muscle memory that helps you along with a little bit more discipline perhaps, and kind of a sense of when to stop going down a dead end. That's one thing that I lost a lot of time with in Blue Mafia, was dead ends. But it was my first, I made a lot of mistakes, being rude to people that I needed to be nice to, for example, as a journalist, like asking asshole questions in the first interview rather than the third. But I think discipline is a problem no matter how much writing you get under your belt. But I do not subscribe to the idea of writer's block. Like, there's a difference between like not knowing where to go in a story and writer's block. Like, I don't allow writer's block to be something that I believe in.
Yeah, that makes me think a lot about the difference between writing as like a craft and art, between writing as a craft and as an art. And I think, like poets would talk a lot about writer's block because we're kind of waiting for this inspiration to come from some external force, waiting for the muse. But if you think of being a writer as like a craftsman, well, you have to go to the market, right? You have to go and create your craft. So it might not be inspired on that particular day, but you go and get whatever needs to be done.
That is such a great, profound insight. I've never heard somebody talk about it in that way. That's really interesting to me. I have relied a lot on the craft and less on the inspiration, but my ideas come when I'm in the shower. But everybody needs to find out what that is for them, whatever it is that gets that. Like, some people have dreams, or have an idea that they wake up with. I have ideas. It sometimes takes me a long time to figure out how to get out of a place in a story where I don't know where to go. But I don't call it writer's block. I just don't know where I go, where my character goes next. But sometimes I'll have an idea like months later. So for that reason, I will often like put down a story that I'm working on and pick it up when I have an idea.
Yeah, a lot of times that space, right, is so important, to work hard on something and then get away from it, whether you're going to take a walk or hit the gym or take whatever, but to like get away from being completely immersed in something. And that's when an idea comes. I've heard people talk about this idea of like ideas being these things in the air that we hold an antenna up and we catch, like they're kind of exterior to us. And then how, as an artist, well, how do you catch the most ideas? What do you do in your life where you're going out and kind of giving yourself the space for them to come in? It's interesting. It could become almost like a spiritual conversation,
Absolutely. But to like completely bring up the opposite of that, AI is now a pretty rich and fertile ground to provide like the seed of an idea. Like, one thing that I will do with ChatGPT is I will explain to the robot where my character is and ask for 20 ideas of what the thing, what could happen. Or I will ask for just like, 20 titles for this book, or 20 of this, like if I have a character with I have this screenplay that I've been working on for a really long time about a blue sheep, not a black sheep, like a Democrat in a Republican family. And I wanted to write about the transformations that happen in the characters' lives that influence their political views. And so I explained this idea to ChatGPT, and I asked for like 50 different things that could be life experiences that would influence a person's political beliefs. And the ideas that were spat out by the machine were interesting. You know, they weren't profound, but they had that like seed that could be developed.
Yeah, and then you can maybe take 2 ideas or 3 ideas and mix and match them and
Yep.
create something new. Yeah, and I mean we could talk about AI a lot as writers, but maybe I think we'll hold off for a future conversation about AI. But it does make me think of technology kind of as this neutral tool, and this tool that no matter what you think about it, it is there. Just like when I write on my computer, I can also be surfing on Google, or I could be researching something, or I could be walking down Google Maps, like you said. And it kind of comes down to our own discipline and creativity as to how we're going to go about, using these tools.
I have a great anecdote. So years ago, a nurse who was writing in her spare time approached me with this like fragments of a novel, and she had a gift. Like, she is one of the best writers that has ever come to me with her work. I begged her years later. I was like, please tell me that you've continued to write, like almost pressuring her, like, please keep writing. Like, you have a gift. But she wrote a scene in a neighborhood that I have been to in Egypt. And she wrote it with so much color and so much feeling. And I asked her about it. I was like, how did you write this scene? Like, I know that neighborhood, and I have tried to write a scene in that neighborhood, and I was not able to do it as well as you did. And she had never been there.
Mm.
She did it all through research. I had no idea.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, we do have quite an amazing set of tools available to us, in 2024. And if you start to look at it in a positive way,
Yeah.
it could be really phenomenal. I have a tendency to look at not everything, but sometimes look at the negative aspects about the internet and social media and AI. But it is pretty remarkable.
I'm a silver lining kind of guy, and I feel like even though I'm like kind of a bad testimony for like writer's discipline, having like 5 unpublished books, but I really feel like there's no excuse to not be getting it down. There's so many aids to help you. Like finishing it, totally different story. Totally different story. There are a million things that can get in your way and like justifiably take you away from it. And sometimes I feel like writers should give the work the time that it deserves, and not to have like a deadline in their head, like I have to finish it by this day, because then they'll be years later and they'll feel so demoralized. That was one of the things with my company, Free Word Associates. My main motto was never make a writer feel demoralized. Never take away their inspiration. Always don't bullshit them, but give them the encouragement to keep going.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, as artists, I think people really need encouragement from time to time, and if you're working with an editor, you're working with someone you admire, the last thing you want to do is sort of it's already a very hard thing to do, to be writing. So the last thing you want to do is sort of pop someone's balloon or deflate them.
One thing I have to mention is that anybody who serves as a reader has like a sacred duty not to kill the inspiration of the writer, even if it's bad. Like, find some things that are good about it. Because I gave Blue Mafia to somebody I respected, and he only said It's dead on the page.
That was his whole comment.
That was his only comment. Nothing else. Refused to say another word. I felt like something died inside me. Like I felt like I had just been broken up with by like the love of my life. And it hurt for weeks. And it took me a long time to get over it. But the guy was a bitter writer. He was an older man. He was bitter about his own career. And he took it out on somebody else.
Mm.
And you cannot allow somebody to do that to your work, and you better never do that to somebody else. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And why don't we finish on this? Do you have any advice for young writers starting out? And if anyone's listened to this whole conversation, there's been a lot of good things, I think, for young writers to take from it. But if you have anything else that you just throw out there for them.
So for fiction writers, I would say like go for broke. Like don't let people tell you what the industry wants. You know, like don't base your work off of other writers. You know, like get inspiration from other writers and maybe like structure, but don't like imitate. Right? It's a difficult balance when you have a writer that you really admire. You know, I had certain writers that heavily influenced me, but you gotta like find your way. You know, like it sometimes will not happen in the first book, but also like so for nonfiction writers. Get deep in research and don't set like a deadline, and change the chronology. And if you're writing about your own life, think about changing things, maybe changing the order, because real life often, like I like to write books that can be made into screenplays. I try to write with that back end in mind. And I've read a lot of nonfiction memoirs that really were like so careful to observe the facts that they were held up from telling the truth. Like that's something that somebody said to me. They were like, don't let the facts stop you from telling the truth. And the truth is something that's deeper than the facts. And journalists often get hung up on the facts to the point that they lose a deeper truth.
Interesting. Beautiful. Tim, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Can you tell people where they can find your book, Blue Mafia, where they can find you online?
So I have a website, timtolka.com. My company is called Free Word Associates, freeword.us. And you can find Blue Mafia on Amazon. Search Blue Mafia book. Yeah, that's where I am.
Awesome.
And thank you so much for your great questions and insightful observations. It's been a blast.
Great. It's fun talking to you. I hope you're doing well. So I'll also put all your links and everything in the video.
Awesome. Keep writing, everybody. Keep writing.
Keep writing. Do it. Take it easy.